Hello and welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon Ramazan, and I have to say today we're honored to have as our guest Professor Miguel Nicolelis of Duke University. Professor, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you very much.
Now, you work in perhaps one of the most interesting fields I've ever had a guest come on the program, and you work in an area that sort of bridges that gap between science fiction and science fact. The sort of brave new world concept that we can look forward to. And for those billions of people who watch the World Cup, they'd be familiar with your work to some extent because at the opening there were some paraplegic kids that were outfitted with special machinery that allowed them to kick the football. And that's where you come in. You work in the brain-machine interface. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is a field that started to happen basically 15 years ago when we discovered ways to interface animal brains with devices. So we found a way to read electrical brain activity and decode motor messages that were embedded in these electrical storms that the brain of animals and ours can produce. And we found a way to route the information that was embedded in these signals to devices like robotic arms or robotic legs or even avatars, virtual computational models of bodies, so that the animals could learn to move these devices just by thinking. So that's where the idea comes from. It was created to test some theories in neuroscience, but we soon realized that could have a potential therapeutical benefits for humans.
Very practical benefits.
Yeah, very practical for patients, for instance, with spinal cord lesion injuries that make the patient completely paralyzed below the level of the lesion. And that's exactly what the World Cup demo was about. This was about to showcase very briefly to the world that this technology has evolved very quickly now, and we are about to we are building right now prototypes that may in the future allow paralyzed patients to regain control of their locomotion or movements that they have lost because of these lesions.
And it opens up a whole new world of possibilities as well, doesn't it, for sort of a brave new future, where if we have an actual brain-machine interface, it allows us as humans to do things theoretically that really will open up the universe to us.
Yeah, in fact, even for us, normal human beings that don't have a neurological lesion, there is discussion about what new capabilities we would be able to acquire just by using our brains to control devices that not necessarily are next to us, can be anywhere in the world or even out of this world. I had one day a student at Duke that work on an idea of perhaps having these rovers that go to Mars, controlled by the brain activity of the operator.
Because it allows for finer control.
Yes.
Rather than operating with sort of a manual hand-guided
That's
thing.
one of the ideas. It's not here yet, but that's one of the potential future scenarios that we discussed. But in rehabilitation medicine, what we wanted to do in the case of the World Cup demo, we put together an international consortium of scientists from all over the world that came together to basically show with this gesture that we are getting very close to that future, that we can conceive now a future in which a paralyzed person may wear a robotic suit soon after the lesion, and that the brain of this patient that continues to produce the commands for the body to move. The body cannot move because the nerves have been destroyed, and so the body cannot communicate with the brain. But in this future scenario, this patient will imagine the movements he or she wants to perform, and this device will enact these movements and send feedback information to the patient, like Juliano, our patient during the opening of the World Cup, received. Because Juliano not only kicked the ball, but he felt the kick. He felt the contact with the ball, which is very important.
And we should mention, in case people were wondering, you are in fact originally Brazilian. You've been teaching
yes.
Duke for 20 years. So
Yes.
if it was with great pride, I'm sure you saw your work being demonstrated.
Oh, absolutely. I was born in Brazil, educated in Brazil. I went to the United States 25 years ago, have been at Duke for 20, but when the opportunity arose that we could have a demo in the World Cup, that was a suggestion that we made to the Brazilian government. It was accepted instantaneously. For me, it was fantastic because I was going back home.
Well, it was a source of pride for Brazil as well, the fact that pioneering research in that field is being done by a Brazilian.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that this was all funded by a Brazilian science funding agency, FINAP, which is nobody knows in the world, but is one of the largest in the world right now, larger than some American funding agencies right now. And FINAP funded the whole project and brought these scientists from all over the world to work in Brazil, particularly in the last 6 months. We're all in this bunker in Sao Paulo Actually, in the neighborhood that I grew up, was a coincidence, but in the neighborhood that I grew up as a kid in São Paulo.
It's like a sort of a good Manhattan project.
Sort of, yes.
But the work you're doing, as I mentioned, is pioneering. So I guess what you're really doing now is fine-tuning and learning to sort of probably get a sort of closer control of brain signals. Would that be correct?
Yes, yes. The big scientific advance happened during the last decade, in which we learned how to capture these signals from the brain and learn techniques to read in real time these signals and extract what is needed for this kind of motor control. It's just the beginning, of course, but this was the major scientific breakthrough. Nobody had built a piece of machinery like this exoskeleton that could interact with the technology that we developed back at Duke to read the brain signals and to provide feedback back to the patients. In fact, we needed help from good friends in Germany and Switzerland who developed this feedback loop for our patients, because we got sensors all over the vest, the robotic vest. So when the patient moved the leg or step on the ground, the sensors read the contact with the ground or the movement and send signals to a shirt that was developed in Switzerland, in Lausanne, by my good friend Hannes Bloer. And this shirt has vibrating elements that deliver that vibration to the arms of the patient where he has sensitivity. He can still feel, while in his legs he cannot.
And that feedback is important because then it tells
essential.
you the chore has been accomplished.
Yes, and it's essential for the patient to have a feeling that where he's in space, where his body is in space, and more importantly, after practicing with this feedback for a few weeks, the patients tell us that they don't feel they're inside the machine anymore. They feel that their legs are moving. So they have this phantom limb illusion that suggests that they have now acquired the capability of walking again.
So even though it's extrasomatic, in fact, they don't feel disembodied from the
No,
action.
no, I think for me was the biggest result. When you put them in the exoskeleton, they start walking above a certain speed, a speed that is closer to what we do normally. And when they're controlling that with their minds and receiving this tactile feedback in real time in their hands, their brains generate this illusion. And they tell us, look, I don't see the machine, I don't feel the machine anymore. I'm walking by myself.
So that is me.
That's me. Yeah, it's almost like the brain has simulated the device as an extension of their biological bodies.
It's sort of fascinating to me because you're working with an organ of such complexity, the brain, and you're working basically on a neuron level, aren't you?
Yes, yes.
You're working on those little signals, electrical signals, that all those neurons are firing all the time.
Yeah, what took me to the United States way back in 25 years ago, was the desire to develop technology that could read the electrical signals produced by hundreds, thousands of brain cells at the same time, because that's what the brain is about, is this network.
Well, aren't there like billions of neurons?
Billions, yeah. Well, our brain has close to 100 billion.
Wow.
Is the only thing.
You're talking almost like a universe.
Is the only thing comparable to the universe. What you have between your ears is the only thing that we know that can be compared in number of elements to the universe above our heads. So it's very complex, very difficult.
So I guess at first it would have been almost like noise because you're picking up all these signals simultaneously. Yes. And at this point you're trying to fine tune to sort of parse those signals to know which ones are which.
Yes, to some degree, yeah. We knew where to go to get these motor signals. We knew that in areas of the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe, you could identify signals related to motion, to control of the body motion. So we had a good beginning, but we still had to learn, first of all, develop the technology to record all these signals simultaneously from many, many cells. In animals, we do now 2,000 neurons. When I went to the United States, people did one neuron at a time, and it took 20-some years for my colleagues and I to develop a technology that allows us to listen to 2,000 neurons simultaneously right now. For the demo at the World Cup, we use a different approach. We use a more conventional approach. It's called electroencephalography. So you can put a little cap on your head, on top of your head.
Sensors in the paper.
And sensors exactly on the scalp, on the top of the skin. We'll record the electrical signals right here, so you don't do any invasion of the tissue or the brain. And even though this was a non-invasive system, we were able to capture similar signals. And our 8 patients, all 8, became proficient in imagining movements and translating these movements into actions that the exoskeleton could perform. So all 8 experienced again what is the sensation of walk upright. Some of these patients have been in a wheelchair for 10 years. And of course, we don't imagine this because we go upright all the time. But for a patient that is in a chair for 10 years, just to stand and stay upright is a major challenge, and we saw that. And so by the time these guys were walking with the exoskeletons, their lives, were changing dramatically. But what you said is real. What we are focusing now is fine-tuning the technology and fine-tuning the actual robot, because this was just the first prototype. And we feel that we can actually reduce the weight, we can reduce the complexity of the machine to a point in which this could become a tool the patients can wear in daily life. That's the long-term goal.
So you're dealing with several elements at the same time. You're dealing with translating the brain signals and then also transforming that signal into actual physical movement or sense of something.
Absolutely, yeah.
Would it be fair to say that an invasive approach would be more efficient and effective than non-invasive?
In the long term, if you get inside the brain, you get better signals, particularly for the upper limbs, for the arms and hands, because you can see the richness of movements here require a lot of fine-tuning, of fine control. And that you can only get if you put these sensors inside the brain. And this is going to come. I have been working as I said, for 25 years on this technology, and it's very likely that they are going to become like the heart pacemaker. They're going to be miniaturized. You'll be able to implant this in the brain. Nobody will know. There'll be nothing coming out, and it's going to be all by telemetry, a wireless transmission of these signals. We already have this. In monkeys, we already do wireless transmission of brain signals. And at that point, you're going to get the best possible brain signals to control devices like robotic prosthetic arms, legs, or full body exoskeleton. But until then, we had to start somewhere in patients. And we discovered a way to use EEG that was very efficient, and it worked. And for a patient, that's what you need. If the patients are happy with the result and they feel that their quality of life has improved, for you, you have achieved an important thing.
I guess even as you're working on the more invasive aspects, you would be perhaps using primates for that,
yes,
rather than
exactly.
obviously working in humans, which is frowned on. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. We have been working with primates, and we now know that we can keep these implants for close to 6 years in primates, which is a very long time.
Well, tell us about Aurora.
Yeah, well, Aurora was the first pioneer primate, rhesus monkey, that was the first one implanted with this technology, and the first one to demonstrate that she could imagine complex arm and hand movements and get a robotic arm to actually do that without moving her own body. That was the most daunting and stunning probably day of my career, because I was there in the lab. We didn't expect that to happen so quickly. And Aurora had to get this juice. She wanted to drink this orange juice. She was very avid.
Brazilian, I understand.
Brazilian, of course, yes, the best one that you can get, together with the Brazilian coffee. But Aurora, to do that, she could not simply move. She learned to do that first moving a joystick. So she moved a joystick, and every time
and that helped you map
exactly
what brain parts were.
What kind of brain parts were producing this brainstorm related to the movements of her arm. So if she moved the joystick correctly and got a little cursor, computer cursor, in a target very quickly, she got a drop of orange juice. And she did that wonderfully, and she could do 98% correct, very quick. I have movies of Aurora doing this. It looks like a kid playing a video game, and she got 400 mLs of orange juice in an afternoon. But then we play a trick with her. We took the joystick away. We had the implant so we could read her brain signals, and without talking to her, because we couldn't, we let Aurora discover that if she wanted to have the juice, she had to move the computer cursor to the target.
By imagining it.
By imagining. Not by using the joystick, because there was no joystick anymore. And that first night, we thought, okay, this is going to take weeks for Aurora to figure this out. Well, she figured it out in a few minutes. And we were sitting in this room next to her, and all of a sudden, Aurora relaxed her arms. We heard the computers processing this 100-cell brainstorm, and all of a sudden, the cursor moved to the target. And we are next to the robotic arm that was actually controlling the cursor. So we saw the robotic arm moving in the void, because there was nothing around it. But there, by moving, the robotic arm was dragging the cursor in front of Aurora to the target, and she had the first drop of orange juice. And
that was your celebration moment.
It was one of the craziest days of my career, because she continued to do it for an hour. Once she got it, and we are recording muscle activity coming from her arms, and they were flat. There was no muscle contraction in her arms. She was just imagining and getting the robot to behave the way it was necessary to get the reward.
I'm trying to wrap my own brain around it because I think we're all used to hearing our brains compared to a computer, which is kind of silly because our brains came first.
Yes.
But computers operate on binary codes. You can read on and off.
Absolutely.
Do our neurons operate on anything even remotely similar when you're listening?
No. They have binary phenomena. We can detect action potentials.
It's fired.
It's firing. But my point of view, and many of my colleagues, is that there's no way you can reduce the complexity and the ingenuity and the beauty of the human brain to a binary machine.
So it has a language of its own then?
It has a language of its own. Computers will never reproduce the full richness of a human brain. In fact, we are on the side of this field that it doesn't believe at all in these projects that suggest that computers will reproduce our human nature. Mm-hmm. We really don't believe in that. And my laboratory actually has a lot of evidence that we are about to publish suggesting that endeavor is completely meaningless. Our brain is not a digital Turing machine or a regular computer.
So how do you get people to get away from that concept? Because I mean, it's been so ingrained in us. Your brain is a computer. Your brain is a computer. It's the CPU.
Absolutely. There's a lot of.
And you're saying there's much more to your brain than any computer could ever be.
Much more, as you said.
Because our brain conceived of the computer.
There's one of the very good analogies that I always like to use. We design a computer, but computers have not designed a human brain, and will never, and they will never behave like us. So all that we see in Hollywood movies or Bollywood movies, and what we see in science fiction, and we see in some scientists, actually, computer scientists and even neuroscientists out there, has no mathematical support, has no neurobiological support, even because brains were not built by anybody. Brains evolved. And when brains compute over millions of years through a sequence of pseudo-random processes that you cannot reproduce at all. And more than that, brains utilize their entire structure to compute.
So that just throws that movie Lucy out the window, doesn't it? Which
I
think was pretty well established already.
Yes, exactly. So, and I think this is a crucial debate, in my opinion. Not everywhere in the United States, in Europe, even in Brazil at this point, is a crucial debate, because what we're talking about is what is human nature. Mm-hmm. What defines us as human? And the traits and the abilities, the skills that define us as humans, according to this view, will never be reproduced by binary logic. They can't. That's the reason you don't see computers in a computer store composing Shakespeare sonnets or Caribbean music, because they can't.
So it's interesting, because a lifetime then of working with the brain, you are actually you seem more fascinated and sort of more in awe of its capacity than
absolutely. And
most of us seem to be.
And I have to tell you, I have worked for 25 years with high-end technology, the most powerful computers that you can get, we have worked with, And when I go to these meetings on computer scientists, I think they really don't feel, very nicely, because I keep telling them, you can wire up all the supercomputers that exist or have been produced to this day together. If you could wire them up all together, you're not going to produce a single human brain. It's simply impossible. And this is kind of anathema to the what you just said.
I'm sure you raised some hackles, with that.
But I enjoyed that.
But so you're spending your life trying to decode, you and your colleagues trying to decode the human brain. And to come back to the analogy of the computer, I suppose to some extent you're being held back by the fact that technology isn't where it could be in order for you to actually do that decoding fast.
Luckily, there's a paradox. In what I told you, there's a paradox. There are some signals, like motor command signals, that I can extract from the brain and use a computer to get robotic devices to move. So in some sense, we are lucky that at that level of complexity, there is still some information that you can readily extract from the brain and make use of it. But there are other levels of brain-derived information that, as you said, and I agree totally, are unique to our brains and the way we behave as humans. You cannot extract. You can extract directly by using computers.
Because, as you mentioned, the example of walking as you did on playing football.
Yes.
Every single thing we do as a human being, which is controlled by our brains, I suppose any animal on the planet is controlled by its brain. Well, for those with actual developed brains. there's a whole number of layers of things going on at the same time. When we stand up to go and walk, there's a process of moving the muscles to stand up.
Right.
There's the idea of the balance system coming into place.
Absolutely.
Our vision comes into place to determine where we're going and what's around us. And then there's the process of thinking about where am I going and how do I get there.
Yes.
There are all these things going on. So it's not just a matter of move this.
No, exactly. And in fact, that was one of the problems for many, many decades on research on the motor system. It's because neuroscience was compartmentalized. It was divided. So some people study just motion, the others study perception, the others study emotions, the others study consciousness. Mm-hmm. But in reality, the brain doesn't work like that. The brain is a whole, and it operates as a whole. And you cannot divide the brain for the brain's own sake, because it doesn't have any meaning, for the operation of this system. And so there's a new emerging view or emergent view of the brain that considers the system as a complex system that has been looked at as a whole. And that's in my opinion, is the frontier of neuroscience right now, is how we go about approaching these very high level properties of the brain, like our emotions, our cognitive skills, how we use our memories to dictate how our future actions are going to be taken. What is then the mechanism that integrates all these into a single behavior? And we are just starting that. This is just really, really very new for neuroscience.
So after a lifetime of working in this field, do you feel you're any closer to understanding exactly what consciousness is, that thing we've all been trying to grapple with, and self-awareness?
Yes, it's very difficult. I don't think we are too close to solve it. I have ideas, of course, and certainly these ideas, if the theories that we work in our lab are correct, and we don't know, of course, because we're just starting to test them.
Such as the nature of science.
Yes, the nature of science is always evolving. That's the beauty of science. I like to tell, like today with the kids, the Nihurst meeting, the science is a great profession because first of all, you pay to be a child for the rest of your life. You pay to be curious. And one, it never ends because every question that you answer opens up 20 more questions that you have to now dig deep into to try to move a step forward. And I think nobody has, in my opinion, a really good understanding of what consciousness, self-awareness, or free will is. But we at least have now a variety of hints, a variety of potential pathways that we can try.
I guess it's that old saying, the more you learn, the less you know.
Absolutely.
Because you suddenly realize there are whole other dark areas that have opened up. Because
and the more pleasure you have in the adventure, yeah.
We only have a couple more minutes, Professor. Would it be okay to do a second part of this interview?
Oh, absolutely.
And we should mention, of course, as you touched on there, bad me, that Nihurst is the reason that you are here.
Yes.
Not that just you love Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm sure you do, but you're here to do a presentation, which you're going to be doing tomorrow, which is Tuesday.
Yes.
And what will the presentation be on?
Well, since we are talking to, close to 200 kids from all over the Caribbean, high schoolers that came here thanks to this great program that Nihurst put together to attract kids and to introduce them to science and to show them that science is an option for their lives, and the scientific method can be something that can, independent of what they do, later on in life, the scientific method can be something that they can use in life as scientists, engineers, physicians, lawyers, soccer players, whatever. And I thought that was an irresistible invitation to come and to talk to them as a Brazilian scientist, someone that grew up in South America and then moved to North America, this story on how we went from listening to Aurora's brain all the way to having on a football field on the opening of the World Cup, or perhaps the biggest sports event, a scientific demonstration. If I would tell you that, or if someone would tell me 30 years ago that I would be doing this scientific demonstration on the opening game of the World Cup in Brazil, I would laugh out the guy and say that he lost his marbles.
It must annoy you a little bit that when somebody saw that, a lot of people saw that demonstration, billions of people saw the demonstration, that some people went, nah, that's no big deal, because they see it in movies all the time.
Exactly, yeah.
And they don't realize exactly what went into getting that accomplished.
Oh, yes, that's a good point, because when we talk about robotics, and my friends that are roboticists, they cry about this all the time, that the standard, the benchmark that they have to live off or live after is the Hollywood movies, these robots that go flying, doing all this thing. And no robot can do anything like that. Robotics is its infancy. And they admit that there has been a lot of progress in the last decades, but A robot cannot put a hand in a pocket and identify which is the key in my keychain that opens the door, like my a 3-year-old kid would do it very quickly.
Or even some primates.
Or even some primates. A robot, if you change the terrain, and you may not get this robot to walk in the new terrain.
And the robots we have now are programmed to do whatever they do. They're not conscious to actually
They're not
figure it out
conscious to
themselves.
solve riddles, like common riddles that we solve. So yes, to some degree, this is sometimes it's kind of, even in Brazil, when I had to tell people, look, when we did this demo, I said, this has never been done. This is like creating a plane and flying the first 50 meters, like a Brazilian did 100 years ago. That was the first guy who actually flew, was a Brazilian.
Got that in there, okay.
Yeah, that's very important. Santos Dumont, which is the name of our foundation. But I had to explain to people, look, what you see in movies is computer created, is fiction. It's not what you can do in reality.
And what you're doing is real.
Real. But there's another point. One day I went to a science...
Almost completely out of time. So do you want to carry to the next part of the interview? We'll continue.
Oh, yeah, we can. Oh, sure.
Okay, because we'll wrap it up here because we're completely out of time, Professor Nicolelis.
Sorry.
I want to thank you so much for being here, and we'll continue our conversation in the next program.
It was
Thank
a
you
great
so
pleasure.
much. A great
Thank
pleasure.
you.
You've been watching One on One. Join us again tomorrow for part 2.